All right, so Viltrox has done it. They have made the lens that I've been asking Sony to make for years now, the 35mm 1.8 EVO. Now, alongside this lens, Viltrox has also announced a 55mm 1.8 EVO that is going to have its own separate video coming out later this week. But I have been using the 35 1.8 EVO for about the past month, and I'm just going to cut right to the chase. This lens is actually incredible, and it's everything I hoped and dreamed of it ever being. Now, if you watched my video on the Viltrox 85mm f2 EVO, I said I was really excited about that lens, and that is for one main reason, because if this is a new line of lenses, I really hoped we would get a 35mm lens soon, and Viltrox has done it. Now, the reason this lens is what I have been asking Sony to make for a long time is because this is a 35mm 1.8. There's plenty of 1.4s and there's plenty of f2s, but not a 35mm 1.8 that has a high enough build quality that also has an aperture ring. Now, Viltrox has the older 35 1.8 that does have an aperture ring, but the build quality and the image quality is not as high as I would want it to be. But the build quality of this lens is solid, and the aperture ring has a very nice click to it. Now, not just that. I've been using the original Sony 35mm 1.8 full-frame lens for almost 5 years now. And while I do love that lens, and it was my go-to lens for pretty much that entire time, it even replaced my 35mm 1.4 G Master. The lens had some pretty big flaws, some major caveats to it that I tried to look past, but they were always glaring issues. Number one, that is the chromatic aberration. The chromatic aberration when you're shooting wide open at f1.8 on the original Sony 35 is absolutely terrible. Now, some people don't mind chromatic aberration because, you could say it adds a little bit of character to the lens, right? It was actually terrible on that lens. And what did Viltrox do about that? This is an APO lens, which means this lens has a special coating or something like that. And this lens has practically no chromatic aberration, color fringing whatsoever. I've tried my hardest over this past month to get some kind of chromatic aberration with this lens, and I have not been successful yet, which is 100% a good thing. And my third problem with the Sony 35mm 1.8 is that the lens is incredibly soft wide open, and this lens is incredibly sharp wide open. And for those three reasons, the Viltrox 35mm 1.8 EVO is 100% going to be replacing my Sony 35mm 1.8. Added bonus, it is also pretty much the exact same size, not even maybe half a millimeter bigger than the Sony 35, which is not an issue whatsoever. Higher build quality, better weather sealing, the list goes on and on. Now, where the Sony does happen to beat the Viltrox 35 1.8, I've noticed, is when it comes to autofocus. Now, the Sony 35 1.8 has notoriously good autofocus. In my personal opinion, the autofocus on the 35 1.8 is far superior to the Sony 35mm 1.4 G Master. That lens had not terrible autofocus, but it hunted way more than I would have liked. Now, this lens is kind of right there in between both of those. I would say it's pretty much on par with the 35 1.4 G Master, at least in my experience, but it struggles in the same areas, which is autofocus in low light, which, for a third-party lens, you never really expect it to actually be as good as the first-party lenses. But I think the 35 1.4 G Master had no excuse for having worse autofocus and focus breathing compared to the Sony 35 1.8. But otherwise, the autofocus on this lens is super fast and more than good enough. The only time you might notice that it slows down just a little bit compared to first-party lenses is when you're going from focusing on something really far away to something really close up. All right, give me a second. Let me take a photo of this view because it's actually pretty beautiful. All right, so I think at this point it's safe to say that this video is beyond a first impressions. Like I've said, I've been using this lens for about the past month, so this is definitely a full-on review. And I haven't even mentioned what is actually my favorite aspect of this lens yet. The photos from this lens have a special look and a feel to them, something that was completely devoid on my old Sony 35 1.8. The images out of that are not sharp, wide open, but they also lack any kind of character whatsoever, any kind of contrast, and the colors, I really had to work hard to actually make them look good when editing the photos. But from the 35 Evo, the contrast is incredible. The colors look deep, they look rich. I haven't really used very many lenses that I would say have that 3D pop look. I've heard plenty of other YouTubers mention it in the past, but something about the images out of this lens have vintage characteristics to them. I'll say that. So the photos look so good. It's gotten to the point where I want to go out and actually reshoot almost every single photo I've shot with the old lens, just so I can have them with this lens. And with that said, I am tired of talking about this lens. I want to go take some photos, so let's go do that. Alright, so it's actually a couple days later now. Immediately after I got done filming that last part of the video, I actually broke my tripod. Rest in peace, that was my favorite tripod. By the time I got back to get my other tripod, it was too late to get the photos I actually wanted. But it's okay, the light is actually beautiful this morning, so let's take advantage of it while we can. I'm so glad I went out this morning because the colors and the tones are amazing today. Alright, on to the next location while the light is still good. Alright, I've talked about how much I love this lens. Let's talk about some things that I don't like about this lens. Now, I did mention the autofocus earlier in the video. I'm not going to hold that against the lens because I think it could be easily improved with firmware updates, and I have no doubt that it will be. Viltrox is really good about updating the firmware of their lenses. But the only other thing that I've really noticed about this lens is the vignetting and the distortion. Now, if I'm being honest, when it comes to a lot of lenses, distortion doesn't really bother me that much, unless the distortion is just laughably bad, like the 24mm 2.8G lens. It's pretty bad on that lens. On this lens, it's definitely noticeable if you're shooting straight lines vertically. If you're shooting straight lines horizontally, it's really not a problem. But I know for people watching this video, it could be an issue. I personally think a little bit of distortion adds a little bit of character to a lens, so I don't really think that's too much of a problem. Now, of course, we do not have the profile corrections out yet for me to play with and test and see how they improve upon the distortion, but I'm sure they will. And then the other thing is the vignetting. Now, the vignetting's kind of weird. It could totally be my camera, and it could not be. Let me explain. This light is getting really bright. So the vignetting in the corners is really not bad at all, but I noticed there does seem to be a bit of distortion when I'm shooting, say, vertically, and the sun is off to the left. There will be a bit of distortion coming in, and it's completely possible that could have something to do with the electronic front curtain shutter on the Sony A7C II, A7CR, A7C. So I'm definitely just gonna have to play around with that a little bit more once the profile corrections come out, just to see what the actual root of that problem is. But regardless of that, it's still not a big deal, and a little bit of tweaking in Lightroom fixes all of those problems. Other than that, there's really nothing to complain about when it comes to this lens. It's really just the standard stuff that you will notice with most lenses. All right, the sun's starting to get really high in the sky, so we should probably get back to taking photos before the sun is too high in the sky. But this frame behind me, when I was setting up for the video, actually looks really nice. It is a beautiful day.
No, all this area over here.
I've been coming here for years taking pictures.
Okay. Because they just called me and said there's a guy with a tri-cab.
Okay, just to clarify.
Yeah.
So, this area, it's a public sidewalk, but it's still private property, or how does that work?
Yeah, same thing with the park.
All right, that was the strangest interaction I think I've ever had here, because I've been coming to this spot for years taking photos. If you watch the channel for any period of time, you will know that I come here and take photos and make videos here a lot. And I've never had security come up to me before. So that was really weird. Security guard was really cool, but also kind of just makes me not want to ever come back here, because it kind of just makes me angry. I'm just taking photos of the city, you know? What's the big deal? So let's get one last photo here, then we'll wrap it up for the day and talk about this lens a little bit more. Probably not here though. All right, for like 30 seconds there, the light was actually perfect. A little bit of clouds came in front of the sun, and I was able to get the exact photo that I wanted. So with that, I'm happy. Let's go talk about our final thoughts on this camera. All right, well, that's not at all how I expected this video to go. That security guard caught me very off guard. But hey, if you are a photographer, then you probably know and understand how it is with security sometimes. He thought I was filming some kind of propaganda to use against them. If anything, I'm filming good propaganda trying to make the city look nice. I don't know. It could have something to do with the fact that at the medical school there were a couple protests years ago about animal abuse and the experimenting they've done on animals. But hey, that's besides the point. I've already said pretty much everything that I want to say in this video about this lens for now, at least. The only other thing I want to touch on is something that's been a reoccurring theme on my YouTube channel. And that is the fact that, gear doesn't matter, but it does. It's the gear that inspires you to go out and shoot. And for me, the Sony A7C, A7CR for years has been that camera. But I feel like I've never really found that lens that I've really connected with. I mentioned I have used the 35 1.4 G Master for a long time. Didn't really like the size of it on the A7C. Then I switched to the 35 1.8. And that lens has a lot of issues, but I came to love it and appreciate it for what it was. But I feel like this is the first time I've used a 35mm lens, and I've used other ones as well. And I think this is the first one that really checks all of those boxes for me. Now, it might not check all of those boxes for you, and that's totally okay. You might prefer the other 35 1.8. You might prefer the 35 1.4 G Master. But I think this is an option all of you watching this video should definitely consider, especially if you are not happy with either of those lenses and you're trying to find something else, something different. In a way, it almost feels like Viltrox made this lens for me. So now I have the camera that inspires me to get out and shoot, and I have the lens that inspires me to get out and shoot to go with it. If there's anything that I did not touch on in this video that you would like to know about this lens, please leave a comment down below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. And my video about the 55mm 1.8 EVO lens that Viltrox also released will be coming out later this week or next week. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and subscribe to help support the channel, and I hope I could inspire you guys to get out and take more photos. Go out and shoot.